Hello, this is a continuance of Jeeves and the Feudal Spirit by P G Wodehouse. And we're up to chapter 16. If you are one of the better element who are never happier than when curled up with the works of B. Wooster, you possibly came across a previous slab of these reminiscences of mine in which I dealt with a visit Jeeves and I paid to Deverwell Hall, the rural seat of Esmond Haddock, J.P., and will recall that while under the Haddock roof, Jeeves found my Aunt Agatha's son Thos in possession of what is known as a cosh, and very prudently impounded it, feeling, as who wouldn't, that it was the last thing that ought to be at the disposal of that homicidal young thug. The thought which had flushed my brow in the manner described was, had Jeeves still got it? Everything turned on that. I found him, richly apparelled and wearing the bowler hat, at the wheel of the car on the point of putting foot to self-starter. Another moment and I should have been too late. Racing up, I inaugurated the quiz without delay. "Jeeves," I said, "throw your mind back to that time we stayed at Deverwell Hall. Are you throwing?" "Yes, sir." "Then continue to follow me closely. My Aunt Agatha's son, young Thos, was there." "Precisely, sir." "With the idea of employing it on a schoolmate of his called Stinker, who had incurred his displeasure for some reason. He had purchased, before leaving London, a cosh, or a black jack, to use the American term." "Never mind American terms, Jeeves. You took the weapon from him." "I deemed it wisest, sir." "It was wisest. No argument about that. Let a plug ugly like young Thos loose in the community with a cosh, and you are inviting disasters and... what's the word? Something about cats." "Cataclysms, sir." "That's it, cataclysms. Unquestionably you did the right thing, but all that is besides the point. What I am leading up to is this. That cosh, where is it?" "Among my effects at the apartment, sir." "I'll drive with you to London and pick it up." "I could bring it with me on my return, sir." I did a brief dance step. "On his return, forsooth! When would that be? Late at night, probably, because the gang is at a hot spot like the Junior Ganymede don't break up a party at the end of lunch. I know what happens when these wild butlers let themselves go. They sit around till all hours, drinking deep and singing close harmony and generally whooping it up like a bunch of the boys in the Malamute saloon. It would mean that for the whole of the long summer day I should be defenceless, an easy prey for a Stilton who, as I had just been informed, was prowling about, seeking whom he might devour. "That's no good, Jeeves. I require it immediately. Not tonight, not a week from Wednesday, but at the earliest possible moment. I am being hotly pursued by Cheesewhite, Jeeves." "Indeed, sir." "And if I am to stave off the challenge, the Cheesewhite challenge, I shall have need of a weapon. His strength is as the strength of 10, and unarmed I should be calm before his sickle." "Extremely well put, sir, if I may say so, and your diagnosis of the situation is perfectly accurate. Mr. Cheesewhite's robustness would enable him to crush you like a fly." "Exactly." "He would obliterate you with a single blow. He would break you in two with his bare hands. He would tear you limb from limb." I frowned slightly. I was glad to see that he appreciated the gravity of the situation, but these crude details seemed to me uncalled for. "No need to make a production number of it, Jeeves," I said with a touch of coldness. "What I am driving at is that, armed with the cosh, I can face the blighter without a tremor. You agree?" "Most decidedly, sir." "Then shift ho," I said, and hurled myself into the vacant seat. The cosh of which I have been speaking was a small rubber bludgeon, which at first sight you might have supposed unequal to the task of coping with an adversary of Stilton Cheesewhite's tonnage, In repose, I mean to say, it didn't look like anything so frightfully hot, but I had seen it in action, and was hep to what Florence would have called its latent potentialities. At Deverell Hall one night, for the soundest of reasons, but not too long to go into here, Jeeves had been occasioned to bean a policeman with it, Constable Dobbs, a zealous officer, and the smitten slop had dropped as the gentle rain from the heaven drops upon the place beneath. There is a song frequently sung by curates at village concerts, which runs, "I fear no foe in shining armour, though his lance be bright and keen." Or is it swift and keen? Anyway, I can't remember. Not that it matters. The point is that those words summed up my attitude to a nicety. They put what I was feeling in a nutshell. With that cosh on my person, I should feel debonair and confident, no matter how many cheese whites came bounding at me with slavering jaws. Everything went according to plan. After an agreeable drive, we dropped anchor at the door of Berkeley Mansions and made our way to the flat. There, as foreshadowed, was the cosh. Jeeves handed it over. I thanked him in a few well-chosen words. He went off to his orgy, and I, after a bite of lunch at the Duones, settled myself in the two-seater and turned its nose Worcestershirewards. The first person I met as I passed through the portals of Brinkley Court some hours later was Aunt Dahlia. She was in the hall, pacing up and down like a distraught tigress. Her exuberance of the morning had vanished completely, leaving her once more the haggard aunt of yesterday, and I was conscious of a quick pang of concern. "Golly!" I said. "What's up, old relative? Don't tell me that scheme of yours didn't work." She kicked morosely at a handy chair, sending it flying into the unknown. "It hasn't had a chance to work." "Why not? Didn't Spode turn up?" She gazed about her with sombre eyes, apparently in the hope of finding another chair to kick. There not being one in her immediate sphere of influence, she kicked the sofa. "He turned up all right, and what happened? Before I could draw him aside and get so much as a word in, Tom swooped on him and took him off to the collection room to look at his foul silver. They've been in there for more than an hour, and how much longer they're going to be, heaven knows." I pursed the lips. One ought, I felt, to have anticipated something of this sort. "Can't you detach him?" "No human power can detach a man to whom Tom is talking about his silver collection. He holds him with a glittering eye. All I can hope is that he will be so wrapped up in the silver end of the thing that he'll forget all about the necklace." The last thing a nephew of the right sort wants to do is to shove a wallowing aunt still more deeply beneath the surface of the slough of despond than she already is. But I had to shake my head at this. "I doubt it." She gave the sofa another juicy one. "So I doubt it. That's why I'm going steadily cuckoo and may at any moment start howling like a banshee. Sooner or later he'll remember to take Spode to the safe, and what I am saying to myself is, when? Where? I feel like... Who was the man who sat with a sword dangling over him suspended by a hair, wondering how long it was going to be before it dropped and gave him a nasty flesh wound? She had me there, nobody I had met. Certainly not one of the fellows at the Duones. "I couldn't tell you, I'm afraid. Jeeves might know." At the mention of that honoured name, her eyes lit up. "Jeeves! Of course, he's the man I want. Where is he?" "In London. He asked me if he could take the day off. It was the Junior Ganymede monthly luncheon today." She uttered a cry which might have been the howl of the banshee to which she had alluded, and gave me the sort of look which in the old tally-ho days she would have given a mentally deficient hound, which she had observed suspending its professional activities in order to chase a rabbit. "You let Jeeves go away at a time like this, when one has never needed him more." "I hadn't the heart to refuse. He was taking the chair. He'll be back soon." "By which time?" She would have spoken further, good deal further, if I were to write the message in her eyes, but before she could get going, something whiskered came down the stairs, and Percy was with us. Seeing me, he halted abruptly. "Wooster!" His agitation was very marked. "Where have you been all day, Wooster?" I told him I'd driven to London, and he drew his breath in with a hiss. "In this hot weather, it can't be good for you. You must not overtax yourself, Wooster. You must husband your strength." He had chosen the wrong moment for homing in. The old relative turned on him as if he had been someone she had observed heading off the fox, if not shooting it. "Go in, you ghastly sheep-faced fugitive from hell!" she thundered, forgetting, or so I imagined, that she was a hostess. "Get out of here! Blast you! We're in conference!" I suppose mixing with editors of poetry magazines toughens a fellow, rendering him impervious to verbal assault. For Percy, who might well have been expected to wilt, didn't wilt by a damn sight, but drew himself up to his full height, which was about 6 feet 2, and came back at her strongly. "I'm sorry to have intruded at an unseasonable moment, Mrs. Travers," he said, with a simple dignity that became him well. "But I have a message for you from Mother. Mother would like to speak to you. She desired me to ask if it would be convenient if she came to your room." Aunt Dahlia flung her hands up emotionally. I could understand how she felt. The last thing a woman wants when distraught is a chat with someone like Ma Twatter. "Not now!" "Perhaps later, perhaps?" "Is it important?" "I received the impression that it was most important." Aunt Dahlia heaved a deep sigh, the sigh of a woman who feels that they are coming over the plate too fast for her. "Oh, all right then. Tell her I'll see her in half an hour. I'm going back to the collection room, Bertie. It's just possible that Tom may have run down by now. But one last word," she added as she moved away. "The next subhuman gargoyle that comes butting in and distracting my thoughts when I'm trying to wrestle with vital problems takes his life in his hands. Let him make his will and put in his order for lilies." She disappeared at some 40 mph, and Percy followed her retreating form with an indulgent eye. "A quaint character," he said. I agreed that the old relative was quaint in spots. "She reminds me a little of the editress of Parnassus. The same tendency to wave her hands and shout when stirred. But about this drive of yours to London, Wooster, what made you go there?" "Oh, just one or two things I had to attend to." "Well, I am thankful that you got back safely. The toll of the roads is so high these days. I trust you always drive carefully, Wooster. No speeding, no passing on blind corners." "Capital, capital. But we were all quite anxious about you. We couldn't think where you could have got to. Cheesewright was particularly concerned. He appeared to think you had vanished permanently, and he said there were all sorts of things he had been hoping to discuss with you. I must let him know you were back. It will relieve his mind." He trotted off, and I lit a nonchalant cigarette, calm and collected to the eyebrows. I was perhaps halfway through it, and had just blown quite a goodish smoke ring, when clumping footsteps made themselves heard, and Stilton loomed up on the skyline. I reached in a hand into my pocket and got a firm grasp on the old equalizer. Chapter 17. I don't know if you have ever seen a tiger of the jungle drawing a deep breath preparatory to doing a swan dive and landing with both feet on the backbone of one of the minor fauna. Probably not, nor, as a matter of fact, have I. But I should imagine that a T of the J at such a moment would look, allowing, of course, for the fact that it would not have a pink face and a head like a pumpkin, exactly as G. Darcy Cheesewhite looked as his eyes rested on the rooster frame. For perhaps a couple of ticks he stood there inflating and deflating his chest. Then he said, as I had rather supposed he would, "Hoo!" His signature tune, you might say. My nonchalance continued undiminished. It would have been idle to pretend that the blister's attitude was not menacing. It was about as menacing as it jolly well could, as I could jolly well stick. But with my hand on the cosh, I faced him without a tremor. Like Caesar's wife, I was ready for anything. I gave him a careless nod. "Ah, Stilton," I said, "how are tricks?" The question appeared to set the seal on his hotted upness. He gnashed a tooth or two. "I'll show you how tricks are. I've been looking for you all day." "You wished to see me about something?" "I wish to pull your head off at the roots and make you swallow it." I nodded again, carelessly as before. "Ah, yes, you rather hinted at some such desire last night, did you not? It all comes back to me. Well, I'm sorry, Stilton, but I'm afraid it's off. I have made other plans. Percy Gorringe will no doubt have told you that I ran up to London this morning. I went to get this," I said, and producing the man of slender physique's best friend, gave it a suggestive waggle. There is one drawback to not wearing moustache, and that is that if you don't have one, you've got nothing to twirl when baffled. All you can do is stand there with your lower jaw drooping like a tired lily, looking a priceless ass, and that is what Stilton was doing now. His whole demeanour was that of an Assyrian who, having come down like a wolf on the fold, finds in residence not lambs but wild cats, than which, of course, nothing makes an Assyrian feel sillier. "Amazingly effective, these little contrivances," I proceeded, rubbing it in. "You read about them a good deal in mystery thrillers. Koshes they are called, though blackjack is, I believe, the American term." He breathed stertorously, his eyes bulging. I suppose he had never come up against anything like this. One gets new experiences. "You put that thing down," he said hoarsely. "I propose to put it down," I replied, quick as a flash. "I propose to put it down jolly hard the moment you make a move, and though I am the merest novice in the use of the cosh, I don't see how I can help hitting a head the size of yours somewhere. And then where will you be, Cheesewhite? On the floor, dear old soul, that's where you will be, with me carelessly dusting my hands and putting the instrument back in my pocket. With one of these things in his possession, the veriest weakling can lay out the toughest egg colder than a halibut on ice. To put it in a word, Cheesewhite, I am armed, and the setup as I see it is this. I take a comfortable stance with a weighted balance on both feet. You make a spring, and I call us some cucumbers." It was a silly thing to say that about making springs, because it put ideas into his head. He made one on the word cucumbers with such abruptness that I was caught completely unawares. That's the trouble with beefy fellows like Stilton. They are so massive that you don't credit them with the ability to get off the mark like jackrabbits and fly through the air with the greatest of ease. Before I knew what had happened, the cosh, wrenched from my grasp, was sailing across the hall to come to rest on the floor near Uncle Tom's safe. I stood there, defenceless. Well, stood is putting it loosely. In crises like these, we roosters do not stand. It was soon made abundantly clear that Stilton was not the only one of our little circle who could get off marks like jackrabbits. I doubt if in the whole of Australia, where the species of animal abounds, you could have found a jackrabbit capable of a tithe of the swift smoothness with which I removed myself from the pulsating centre of things. To do a backward jump of some 11 feet and install myself behind the sofa was with me the work of an instant, and there for a while the matter rested, because every time he came charging round to my side like a greyhound, I went whizzing round to his side like an electric hare, rendering his every effort null and void. Those great generals, of whom I was speaking earlier, go in for this manoeuvre quite a bit. Strategic retreat is the technical term. How long this round and round the mulberry bush sequence would have continued it is not easy to say, but probably not for any great length of time, for already my partner in the rhythmic doings was beginning to show signs of feeling the pace. Stilton, like so many of these beefy birds, is apt, when not in training, for some aquatic contest to yield to the lure of the flesh pots. This takes its toll by the end of the first dozen laps, while I remained as fresh as a daisy, prepared to fight it out on this line if it took all summer. He was puffing quite considerably, and his brow had become wet with honest sweat. But, as so often happens on these occasions, the fixture was not played to a finish. Pausing for a moment before starting on lap 13, we were interrupted by the entry of Seppings, Aunt Dahlia's butler, who came toddling in looking rather official. I was glad to see him myself, for some sort of interruption was just what I had been hoping for, but this turning of the thing into a threesome plainly displeased Stilton, and I could understand why. The man's presence hampered him and prevented him from giving of his best. I have already explained that the Cheesewhite Code prohibits brawling if there are females around. The same rule holds good when members of the domestic staff appear at the wingside. If butlers butt in while they are in the process of trying to ascertain the colour of some acquaintance's insides, the Cheesewhites cheese it. But mark you, they don't like cheesing it, and it is not to be wondered at that. Compelled by this major domo's presence to suspend hostilities, Stilton should have eyed him with ill-concealed animosity. His manner when he spoke was brusque. "What do you want?" "The door, sir." Stilton's ill-concealed animosity became rather worse concealed. So packed, indeed, with deleterious animal magnetism was the glance he directed at Seppings, that one felt there was a considerable danger of Aunt Dahlia at no distant date finding herself a butler short. "What do you mean you want the door? Which door? What door? What on earth do you want a door for?" I saw that it was most improbable that he would ever get the thing straight in his mind without a word of explanation. So I supplied it. I always like, if I can, to do the square thing by one and all on these occasions. "Scratch, Bertram Wooster," I sometimes say, "and you will find a Boy Scout." "The front door, Stilton, old dance partner, is what one presumes Pop Seppings has in mind," I said. "I would hazard the guess that the bell rang. Correct, Seppings?" "Yes, sir," he replied with quiet dignity. "The front door bell rang, and in pursuance of my duties I came to answer it." And his manner suggesting that this, in his opinion, would hold Stilton a while, he carried on as planned. "What I'll bet has happened, Stilton, old scone," I said, clarifying the whole situation, "is that some visitor waits without." I was right. Seppings flung wide the gates. There was a flash of blonde hair and a whiff of Chanel No. 5, and a girl came sailing in, a girl whom I was able to classify at a single glance as a Pipterino of the first water. Those who know Bertram Wooster best are aware that he is not a man who readily slops over when speaking of the opposite sex. He's cool and critical, he weighs his words, so when I describe this girl as a Pipterino, you will gather that she was something pretty special. She could have walked into any assembly of international beauty contestants, and the committee of judges would have laid down the red carpet. One could imagine fashionable photographers fighting to the death for her custom. Like the heroine of The Mystery of the Pink Crayfish, and indeed the heroines of all the thrillers I have ever come across, she had hair the colour of white corn and eyes of cornflower blue. Add a tip-tilted nose and a figure as full of curves as a scenic railway, and it will not strike you as strange that Stilton, sheathing the sword, should have stood gaping at her dumbly, his aspect that of a man who has been unexpectedly struck by a thunderbolt. "Is Miss Travers around?" inquired this vision, addressing herself to Seppings. "Will you tell her that Miss Moorhead has arrived?" I was astounded. For some reason, possibly because she had 3 names, the picture I had formed in my mind of Daphne Dolores Moorhead was that of an elderly female with a face like a horse and gold-rimmed pince-nez attached to her top button with a black string. Seeing her steadily and seeing her whole, I found myself commending Aunt Dahlia's sagacity in inviting her to Brinkley Court, presumably to help promote the sale of the boudoir. A word from her advising its purchase would, I felt, go a long way with L.G. Trotter. He was doubtless a devoted and excellent husband, true as steel to that wife of his, but even devoted and excellent husbands are apt to react powerfully when the girls of the D.D. Moorhead type start giving them treatment A. Stilton was still goggling at her like a bulldog confronted with a pound of steak, and now her eyes are cornflower blue. Becoming accustomed to the dim light of the hall, she took a deco at him and uttered an exclamation that seemed, oddly, considering what Stilton was like, one of pleasure. "Mr. Cheesewhite," she said. "Well, fancy, I thought your face was familiar." She took another deco. "You are Darcy Cheesewhite, who used to row for Oxford." Stilton inclined the beam dumbly. He seemed incapable of speech. "I thought so. Somebody pointed you out to me at the 8-week ball one year. But I almost didn't recognise you. You look so much handsomer without it. I do think moustaches are simply awful. I always say that a man can lower himself to wearing a moustache might just as well grow a beard." I could not let this pass. "There are moustaches and moustaches," I said, twirling mine. Then, seeing that she was asking herself who this slim, distinguished-looking stranger might be, I tapped myself on the wishbone. "Wooster Bertram," I said. "I'm Mrs. Travers' nephew, she being my aunt. Should I lead you into her presence? She is probably counting the minutes." She pursed the lips dubiously, as if the programme I had suggested deviated in many respects from the ideal. "Yes, I suppose I ought to be going and saying hello, but what I would really like would be to explore the grounds. It's such a lovely place." Stilton, who was now a pretty vermilion, came partially out of the ether, uttering odd strangled noises like a man with no roof to his mouth trying to recite Gunga Din. Finally something coherent emerged. "May I show you round?" he said hoarsely. "I'd love it." "Oh," said Stilton. He spoke quickly as if feeling he had been remiss in not saying that earlier, and a moment later they were up and doing. And I, with something of the emotions of Daniel passing out of the stage door of the Lion's Den, went to my room. It was cool and restful there. Aunt Dahlia is a woman who believes in doing her guests well in the matters of armchairs and chaises longues, and the chaise longue allotted to me yielded gratefully to the form. It was not long before a pleasant drowsiness stole over me. The weary eyelids closed. I slept. When I woke up half an hour later, my first act was to start with some violence. The brains cleared by slumber, I had remembered the cosh. I rose to my feet, appalled and shot from the room. It was imperative that I should recover possession of that beneficent instrument with all possible speed. For though in our recent encounter I had out-generalled Stilton in round 1, foiling him with my superior footwork and ring science, there was no knowing when he might not be feeling ready for round 2. A setback may discourage a Cheesewhite for the moment, but it does not dispose of him as a logical contender. The cosh, you will recall, had flashed through the air like a shooting star to wind up its twip somewhere near Uncle Tom's safe, and I proceeded to the spot on winged feet. Picture my concern on finding on arrival that it wasn't there. The way things disappeared at Brinkley Court, ladders, coshes and whatnot, was enough to make a man throw in his hand and turn his face to the wall. At this moment I actually did turn my face to the wall, the one the safe was wedged into, and having done so gave another of those violent starts of mine. And what I saw was enough to make a fellow start with all the violence at his disposal. For 2 or 3 ticks I simply couldn't believe it. "Bertram," I said to myself, "the strain has been too much for you. You are cock-eyed." But no. I blinked once or twice to clear the vision, and when I had finished blinking, there it was, just as I had seen it the first time. The safe door was open.